Hello, hello. Hi out there on the socials. And let's welcome our peanut gallery in for today as well. Hello, everyone. Hi, hi. Welcome, Piano Tech Radio. Good to see everyone. It'll be a fun one today. We um we had a last minute cancellation from our guest for today, but that's actually we made something fun out of it. Um, we were going to have a musician on the show, and instead he got very sick, too sick to join us. And so instead, we're going to share some segments from some of our masterclass material. Our guest for today was going to be Joe Webb. We'll just have him back at some point in the future. And I'll give an intro to the show, of course, in a minute. This is Piano Tech Radio Hour. If you're here joining us first time on social media, Facebook, YouTube, we'll put some links in the chat there so that you can sign up and actually join us in our Zoom room. If you want to chat with the rest of the attendees, put some questions or thoughts in the comments into the chat, or just have a closer view of what's going on. You're welcome to do that. In addition, I'll give a little bit of info. We're going to be talking about piano keys today quite a bit from many different angles, and you're going to see why momentarily after I sort of introduce the topic at hand. But first, let me give the context for the show today and tell you about what you're viewing if maybe this is your first time or you just kind of want a reminder of what we're up to here. This is Piano Tech Radio Hour. We gather here every Saturday to meet with and learn from the most fascinating and knowledgeable folks from the piano world. This could include manufacturers, rebuilders, musicians, makers of other instruments, all kinds of folks, and of course, piano techs. Our mutual goal is to become better at our crafts and to create a more musical world together. Piano Tech Radio Hour is brought to you by Piano Technicians Masterclasses, an online learning resource that brings you cutting-edge instruction from piano industry masters without leaving your home. You can find out more at pianotechniciansmasterclass.com. You can also subscribe to Piano Tech Radio Hour. It's really only $16 a month. These days, that's like a couple of cups of coffee at the local coffee shop or Starbucks. And if you do that, you get direct access to each week's private Zoom call, as well as the archival recordings of over 200 episodes in a member area. You can join Piano Tech Radio Hour at bit.ly/join PTRH. That's bit.ly/join PTRH. I have actually learned recently that coffee drinking shrinks your brain. I'm on it, so I got to be careful. If you are too, switch out the coffee drinking for a little bit of Piano Tech Radio Hour, Piano Technicians Masterclasses. You'll grow your brain instead. Doesn't that sound fun? All right, a little bit more housekeeping before we dive into our material today. Piano Tech Radio Hour is also released as a podcast. There's a delayed release. It's audio only, but it's still pretty awesome. You can go to pianotechradio.com to learn more about that. We've got fans all over the world. I'm talking we're a top performing arts podcast in places like Belgium, the Philippines, Germany, France. It's really cool to spread the word and connect with people throughout the world. Listen to that while you're driving around, working in the shop, stuff like that. It's a great way to pass the time. We also have a blog at Substack. Just look it up, Piano Technicians Masterclasses on Substack, and you'll get some kind of like you're getting today, a little bit of insights into the behind the scenes of the masterclasses. Of course, this is a radio hour, a little bit more general purpose knowledge. And then if you get into the master classes, you're going to learn stuff that you really can't find anywhere else. And that could be balancing the action, that could be voicing, that could be some repairs you don't get to see often. Specifically today, I'm just going to let the cat out of the bag and then give a little more detail later. We're going to talk about the history of keyboards. I don't think we've released any of this publicly yet. So really hard to get information that will really impress your clients, when you pull out something about, how actions you've been conceived, but also like give you those insights into, how the piano works more deeply and the rationale behind how it works. And then, of course, find us on socials, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. We're on all those places. I'm just going to briefly make justice here. Our lovely assistant a co-host so she can let people in, because I think we got some people in the waiting room here and there. All right. I think it's time to introduce today's topics. So, just a matter of a few days ago, we met with Ben Rocke, who's a very interesting piano technician, kind of like myself. He's got like these two somewhat associated lives. He spent many years as a chemist working for Pfizer, and he's a scientist. And he said, "Well, I like technical stuff. I like the mechanical stuff. I'm an engineering mind, but you know what? I really love pianos, and I want to apply my knowledge there." He left his job at Pfizer. This was well before COVID, so he didn't come up with any of that stuff, but he did come up with some cool, creative solutions to things. Now he's running a piano business. He's going out in the field. He's got a dealership now, Mason and Hamlin. Also, he's going to let the cat out of the bag in this video about a new development for his career that you'll find interesting as well. And then we're going to have some video segments. So we're going to have some video segments from Ben Rocque's lecture on key repairs. Some four basic types of key repairs that you'll find incredibly useful. It'll bring you some money, some cash, and you'll know how to do things right, because Ben really is focused on doing things properly. And then I'm also going to throw in a little bit from Ken Walkup's lecture on the history of piano actions. So I don't know how much, of all the details you're going to learn there, but you get a sneak peek. And if you like all this stuff, you subscribe to Piano Deck Radio Hour, you can see it. But yeah, he'll talk about, I don't know which parts. We'll jump in sort of at the beginning, I think. But in that lecture, he talks all the way from like the first conceptions of piano actions, how they've developed from the Prell mechanic to the Stock mechanic type of leverage styles and whatnot, all the way to what we have today and how it got there and why it works and why we use it. So we'll dive into that as well. Without further ado, let me jump into the lecture with Ben Rocke. We'll get a little bit at the beginning and we'll jump around. I'm going to try, if we have time, to cover just a little bit from each of the topics that he shared during his lecture time. Let me pull that video up really quickly. All right, so share. I'm going to try a video. There we go. And then I've got to pick it. Here we go. That's that. Open that. Okay. Now you guys should see like a green screen here. I think this is the very beginning of that session. Justice, can you just give me a verbal okay? You guys can see that screen?
It's a green screen.
It's a green screen. Perfect.
Green
All right,
screen.
now I'm going to jump in. We're going to go to 3325 and get a little bit of the intro material. That should do the trick. All right, here we go. Let's dive in without further ado.
We're kind of trying to expand into full rebuilding, although I would say at this point we are remarkably inefficient. So that's kind of the barrier we're looking at. And then we're also a Mason and Hamlin dealer, and this is news that is just out. Chris Brown is retiring from Grand Work, and I'm taking over that business as well. So I have a real interest in educating both technicians and also pianists. I think a lot of pianists would know far less about their instrument than the vast majority of other instrumentalists, and so that's really an area of opportunity. So for today, there are four advanced key repairs that I want to talk about. The first is repairs to warped and twisted keys. Then we'll go on to replacing enlarged balance holes, making your own custom key buttons, and finally, actually the work of replacing the key button. What I consider prerequisites for this is some of the just basic key servicing skills, rebushing keys, glue sizing balance holes, and then some basic woodworking skills and and especially safety skills with regard to the power tools. I'm not going to talk a lot about safety. I'll probably mention it a couple places, but I just want to specifically say that if you're going to be using a router and a table saw, it's really important to know what can go wrong and why things go wrong. And kind of the last thing is that hopefully, in addition to giving the understanding of actually how to execute these repairs, I want you to be able to think about some of the design principles and why things are done with this way, what it takes to get a strong, long-lasting professional repair. And hopefully that makes these repairs applicable, robust in different situations, and some of the skills I think you'll find are useful for other repairs as well.
Okay, I'm going to jump over to the beginning of the first topic that's covered here with Ben. The warped and twisted key repairs. Now, I hadn't seen any of this before, so it's pretty cool information. Maybe some of you guys have checked it out. Let's dive into that.
Very good. Okay, so repairing warped and twisted keys. Let's see how this works. So I'm going to try and give credit where credit is due, and this method comes from Ron Nossaman, and it's published in the Piano Technician's Journal in February 2008. The old kind of the previous state of the art had been steaming or heating keys and then bending or twisting them, and it's risky. It's very easy to replace to break a key at the balance rail mortise. It takes a fair amount of time. It's difficult to predict. I've heard people say you have to twist a key around 3 times beyond what you actually want to end up with in order for it to stay when you release the force. And it's just less permanent. There's always the chance that that humidity cycling in the future can reverse the change that you made. And so Ron's method that we'll go over today is sawing a kerf in the key stick and then either adding a wedge or closing it. And it's fast, predictable, can make all sorts of dimensional changes to keys, and very permanent. And I'm just going to show you the principles here. I'll actually start with this key. And so I've made this cut, and the wood that is intact at the bottom acts like a hinge, and so the key can move at that point. And so if you were to add a wedge in it, you could permanently put that kind of a warp in it. So if you're taking a flat key and you wedge it, you're going to make a warp that way. Obviously, you would be trying to undo a warp. Or if you glue it closed, then you get the reverse effect. And so that kind of cut takes care of a warp in this direction. If you need to take care of a warp, in this direction of the key, now we're talking about, a cut in from the side. You'll go at an angle again, and we'll get to some of the reasons behind that in a moment. But perhaps the most fascinating one is, what do you do if there's twists in a key? So warping is just a simple bend to a key, but what if the back of the key starts out at one angle and the front of the key is at a different angle. And if you make a cut, so I'm cutting actually straight down into the key. And if you cut that at an angle, then when you wedge it or close it, it's a little bit difficult to see. Let me see if I can make it a little more obvious by inserting a wedge. I think maybe it's going just too slowly to make it obvious, but so imagine, the back of the key being held steady, and when you close that, it's bringing the front end of the key and changing the angle of it. Or if you were to wedge it, it's going the other direction. So we have the very important question to consider here of how to get strong glue joints. Nothing worse than a repair you just did breaking. In addition to that, the key is a major transfer of energy. So your finger is putting in all the energy that the piano is producing. The soundboard is not an amplifier. It's a transducer, and all the energy came in from your finger. And if the key is not stiff, you're losing power and sustain potential. So there are two things. One is that the end grain of wood is not strong. And so if we just took a key and made a cut just straight up, let's see, if we took a key and made a cut just straight up and down, and then added a wedge or closed it, all the glue would be on the end grain of the wood. So think of the wood like a bundle of straws, and that end grain just soaks in the glue, and it leaves what's called a starved glue joint, where there's just not enough glue actually in the joint to make it strong. And so the way that you get around that is, instead of cutting straight up and down, you cut at an angle, and really the more of an angle you can do, the better. And then you get enough kind of long grain or edge grain in the glue joint to make it strong. If you've ever seen Asian pianos, the key bed is if it's made from solid wood, it's often finger jointed, where you'll have one piece of wood joined to another piece of wood, and since that would be a glue joint of end grain and it would be weak, what they do is they cut kind of a finger pattern into the end of each board, and they fit them together like that, and then you're gluing side grain rather than end grain, and so you get the strength that way. And then another really important thing here is to know if your glue is gap filling or not. And so if you're going to take a key like that and glue that closed, it's only right down at the bottom where you're actually getting a tight glue joint, and all of the space up towards the hinge area has to be filled by a gap filling glue. I have taken Titebond woodworker's glue and glued a key shut with it, and then also with like a medium or a thick CA glue, and glued it shut like that, and then broken the keys to test their strength. And so if you break the key with a medium or thick CA glue in it, it will break, but it won't follow the repair, so that the repair is stronger than the wood. Whereas if you break the joint with Titebond in it, the break will follow the repair. And so Titebond is not an appropriate glue to use if you're just going to close the key. If you're going to put a wedge in it, now you do have a tight fitting joint, and woodworking glue is perfectly appropriate for that.
All right, we're paused there, and I'm going to unshare the screen briefly. And we're going to actually just jump on over to this lecture with Ken Walkup. We'll jump back to some of the material from Ben in a moment here. But yeah, let's get you guys a breadth of topic areas to enjoy. All right, so we need to get the new share, and we'll go to screen 2. Make sure we share the sound and video capabilities. Okay, so now this lecture is in our Piano Technicians Masterclass library. It was from early 2024 with Ken Walkup. He's really been quite prolific in his studies of historical pianos, and so he in maintenance, of course. He works through a university. He's now somewhat retired, but still interfacing with the university and doing some things around historical pianos. And so we're going to learn a little bit from him about the historical action, a little bit of overlap with the topics here, talking about the keys and so forth, but not how to repair them, how they evolved. All right, let's dive in.
Okay, so Pfeiffer divides piano actions into 4 categories depending on where they're activated and how, where the hammer is activated and how. But this is not on his radar at all. So tangent piano, if you do want to include it as a piano, pushes piano history back even into the 1400s. So there's some very early examples of string keyboard instruments with loud and soft. Maybe it's a true piano, maybe it's not. Maybe we could imagine that there's a genus called keyboards with loud and soft, and this is one species in the genus. I look at this and I think this is how a harpsichord maker would approach making a keyboard with loud and soft. So there are things here that look a lot like a harpsichord action. At D, that's the tangent, and it looks just like a harpsichord jack and moves and registers like a harpsichord jack. When you play the key, that tangent flies up, not connected to anything any longer, and hits the string. And it permits, gradations in volume. At F, there's another jack. Really, it's a damper jack, just like in a harpsichord. This is a dogleg jack, and you see that there's a lever there on the left side of the diagram that would permit you to raise all the dampers, which is something you cannot do on any harpsichord. And then at C, that's an intermediate lever, and a lot of these different actions have some kind of an intermediate lever. It's right out of Cristofori. And wherever you see them, the function is to accelerate the hammer faster than it could be accelerated otherwise. So when I look at this, this makes me think Cristofori's contribution is even bigger than he's normally given credit for, because he wasn't thinking like a harpsichord maker. He was doing something completely different and original. Okay, so on to Pfeiffer's 4 categories. The Prell mechanic and the Stoss mechanic are the ones that we're really interested in, but I'm just going to show you a little bit of the other 2 to satisfy curiosity. So here's another category he has, called the pulling action. And there are quite a few varieties of these. This is a pretty late one, but there are down striking pulling actions and vertical ones. I've never actually seen one, and I kind of tend to think I may never, because they're just not very common. Business advancing. Okay, so now we're on to the linked action. This is the Hickman action from 1928. There was just a series of articles in the Piano Technician's Journal about this. And for all the good things that the author said about this, Pfeiffer dismisses the entire category of linked actions. His complaint is basically that there's no let off in these actions. There's always a linkage between the end of your finger on the key and the tip of the hammer. And because of that, according to Pfeiffer, there's just not the possibilities of expression that there are in any of the other categories of action. So I haven't seen this one either. I kind of think I might one of these days, if I keep looking around at piano actions. But besides the fully linked actions, there are actions that are partly linked. And partly linked actions include things like, maybe you've seen old Bechstein pianos, grand pianos, where there's a short abstract on the bottom of the weapon and there's a bird's mouth on a rocker on the key. So that's a linked action of a kind. This is a diagram of the Blüthner patent action, and this is you can download this from the internet from their service manual. So this looks very odd to me, probably to you too at first glance. There's a lot of the English action in this, and you may recognize that a little bit later on. But what's the true jack here is at 3. It's that short stubby thing that's attached to the rocker. And then above that is something that looks kind of more like a jack that's actually pinned to the hammer shank, but it's really the repetition lever. It's a repetition device of some kind at number 7 there, or number 4, I guess. So this is an example of an inverted jack. So it's, instead of being pinned at the bottom, oh no, wait a minute. That's there's another later action we'll look at with an inverted jack. Also, while we're looking at this slide, look at the damper lever a little bit, and you see that there's a hinge there. The hinge is actually parchment, and parchment hinges are all through early actions. They worked pretty well for a long time, for decades, 100 years maybe. When they get old, they can really be problematic. Okay, so now we're getting to the
And can I ask a quick question?
Okay, we'll pause there for a moment and let's jump back into Ben's lecture. We're going to hit the second topic that he covers momentarily here. And share, get into the video and share that. Once again, should see that green screen. And we're going to hop over to moment number 58. As he begins the second topic of key repairs here, replacing a balance hole.
So balance hole repair, I think we've probably all seen some balance holes that were pretty large. Sometimes they can come out of a factory that way. Often what happens is the thickness of the wood right around the balance hole is not, it's not thick enough, and so the key doesn't have strength. And as it's played a lot, or something happens and someone pushes into the front of the key, it's easy to damage. And I've also seen keys where, you know, when the bottom of the wood was sawn, it just tore out part of the wood, and so you ended up with like one side of it that was a millimeter and a half thick. And again, that kind of thickness just can't withstand even just normal use of the piano. So I'm going over a method here from Bill Spurlock, published back in 1990, and I think I learned it first from Mike Morvan at Blackstone Valley Piano, and I'll actually talk some more about him when we get to replacing the key buttons. I want to show the key tool here. This is just a piece of mild steel, and it's got 3 holes drilled in it. One hole, the balance pin goes through, and then the 2 other holes here have a bridge pin, a pointed end bridge pin put in it. And then there's solder added around to hold the bridge pin in position, and then it's sawn and ground flat. And then you'll get, so we'll go into this process a little bit more, but just explaining the fixture jig to start out with. If this is oriented 180 degrees on the balance rail pin when you are indexing the location of the key, you'll get a different answer. And so you need to know which is the front and which is the back. And so I've rounded the corners on the front side and then added the F letter as well, just so it's just always clear which side is the front. The other methods I've seen to do this work, one would be the Onesti key system, which uses a tool and a drill press to drill out a circle around the balance hole, and then there's a second tool that can make plugs with a hole at the center to replace it. You absolutely can get good results with that. One of the disadvantages of it, though, is that you are indexing the new hole against the hole rather than against the other keys. And so you're using an enlarged, damaged hole to figure out where to put the new hole. And so if you use the wrong part of that damaged hole, then you'll get the new hole in the wrong position as well. And then a second repair cuts out the bottom of the key the same way I'm going to show, and then uses wood that is pre-drilled for the balance hole to go back in. And the problem with that wood being pre-drilled is you end up replacing some of the wood that's cut out with epoxy rather than wood, because you don't know exactly where to cut ahead of time. And so this method doesn't leave any epoxy in the key stick. So those are all the points that we just went over about what the jig is. And then so this picture on the bottom right shows the jig on a balance rail pin in the piano. And it's important. And so what you're going to do is set the key over the balance rail pin onto the jig, and the 2 pointed bridge pins are going to mark the bottom of the key. And then when the key is out of the piano, you can put the jig back in those 2 marks, and this hole will show you where you need to drill the new wood for the balance rail pin. And so there are a couple keys, or important points for getting the marking accurate. And so one is that the key needs to be marked in as natural, like as close to its actual position as possible. And so here's a Steinway with an accelerated action, it has the half round bearing instead of, normal balance rail punchings. And so when I mark it, I want the key at the same height. And so I have a small stack of cardboard punchings so that the jig sits raised up a little bit. And then when it's marked, the key is sitting where it actually will in the final repair. And then a second point is that you want all of the keys, so the neighboring keys that you're comparing to, as well as the key that you're going to mark, in a position that is as perpendicular to the balance rail pins as possible. So if the balance rail pins are angled back, for example, you would want the keys to be in their up position, or maybe even elevated a little bit, to try and make the keys perpendicular to the balance rail pin. You might use some aluminum U-channel, for example, to support the fronts of the keys to hold them in the up position. So you place the jig on the balance rail pin, put the key in place, kind of make sure the key is lined up with the other keys, and then press it into the indexing jig in order to get the two indentations from the bridge pins.
All right, let's check back in and see what Ken's up to. Feel like we're switching between the Discovery Channel and the History Channel or something here. But yeah, it's quite fun. I really like this lecture with Ken. Very informative and just such rare information. I think that was my favorite part of it. Okay, let's share on that. Let's continue where we left off. We had a question from one of the live audience members in this one.
Yes, please.
When you said parchment,
Yeah.
So that's totally different than vellum, right? The early English vellum style of hinge.
I'm honestly not sure the difference between vellum and parchment, but
Okay.
I
think vellum's like a skin.
As parchment hinges.
Okay.
The few sources of supply that I've seen will say something like parchment for damper hinges or something like that.
Thank you.
But it's a sheepskin product as far as I know.
I would say that it is vellum.
I think so too. I think vellum is a thin skin, but anyway. Yeah.
Well, this stuff, it does come in different thicknesses, but what you want for this use is pretty thin stuff. And it's not stretchy at all. Okay, so
Can you stay on that one and just explain a little bit
sure.
about the rocker
Yeah.
and kind of what it's doing, and like why are there two screws and how do they get used and adjusted?
Okay, so rockers are in a lot of pianos, uprights and verticals. You don't have to go way back into piano history to see rockers. And so at the bottom, you see there's one surface that's in contact with the key, and the screws are on either side of that. And so they permit you to either loosen one screw and tighten the other to take up lost motion, or to go the other way and add more lost motion. And so that's how you're going to regulate lost motion in this action. Gosh, they're in so many pianos. You've led a charmed life if you haven't run into them so far. They work, but you got two screws to adjust instead of one compared to a capstan. So this is a pretty early idea that lived a longer lifespan than maybe it really deserved. Any other questions, or should we move on?
I have questions. I mean, if other people get this, then that's fine. But I feel like I look at this and I'm like baffled when I look at the actual image. So, and when you're adjusting those rocker cab stands, I've only run into them a few times, maybe tried to adjust them here and there.
Yeah.
Do they both have to be like snug, you know, or like?
Yeah, they have to be snug, but only snug. If one is loose, they'll click. And in fact, they're quite prone to clicking, you know. And it's just awkward to adjust them. You got to get in there. You know, I've got probably 3 different offset screwdrivers, and sometimes one of them will work and the others will not. And it depends, you know, how much room there is underneath the action rail, what else is going on with the design. But they're not uncommon. And if you work with early pianos, even just, you know, up to 1900, maybe even a little beyond that, you'll see these things, grands and uprights both.
And basically you're trying to get the adjustment of that kind of capstan sort of, I mean, jack-ish type of thing.
Yeah. So if you wanted to take up some lost motion in this jack, you'd back off this screw and
That
tighten
makes sense.
this one. Okay, and that would make this go up higher.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And it's pretty similar to your traditional jack. You just kind of want a touch of space there.
Yeah, so I mentioned this had similarities to an English action. And so in this action, the hammer is intended to rest on the rest rail. And the jack is mounted on the key. That's part of the English action. And all English actions require a touch of lost motion, just the way an upright does. You've got to have just a little bit of room there.
And is that a letter button?
Yeah, is there some sort of a let off button-ish type of thing here? And if so, what is it?
So this, if you can think of this as a backwards L-shaped jack.
Yeah, there you go. Okay.
So there's the escapement adjustment right there.
Yep.
I will tell you that this action mystifies a lot of piano technicians. I've never had to work on one. There's a few things online about how to work on them, including the action manual from Bludner. But the action manual actually leaves you scratching your head and more questions than you had when you came in. And the best thing that I found on it, really the only thing that I found at all edifying, is so the book, The Piano Hammer, the English translation is by somebody named Jim Engelhardt, a familiar name maybe to some of you. And he wrote an article that appeared in the July 1965 Piano Technician's Journal. And I scraped that off the internet, and I do have a copy of it. These actions aren't too uncommon. They were pretty popular, and Bludner only abandoned this at a point where the double escapement action had so much momentum that it was not feasible commercially for Bludner to offer both types any longer. But they were popular, and they're supposed to be light and responsive and well-functioning actions.
All right, let's go back and check in on our good buddy Ben and visit that next type of key repair. Go. We'll share that one. It's coming through here. Did it get shared? Share video. Go. Okay, I'm still, oh, there it is. I was struggling to find it on my computer desktop. All right, now we are going to move on to topic number 3. We'll see how much, maybe we can touch upon a little bit of everything. There's one more topic from Ben. We can skip on more Ken Walkup if we really want to make sure we capture that.
This idea was suggested to me by David Rubenstein. I'm not sure how he says it. Obviously, he's a maker of aftermarket retrofit key sets, and I think I called him up looking for a set of key buttons, and I wanted to specify the grain angle on it, and he was like, "Sorry, I'm not going to do that for you. I'll do it for me, but not for you." But he gave me a suggestion on how I could do it, and so that was developed into what I'm presenting now. As far as I know, this is a topic that has never been taught at a PTG convention or in the journal. If anyone is aware of an example of that, I would love to know about that. I wouldn't want to keep saying that if it's not true. Okay. And so why would you consider making your own key buttons? And the two objections to that would be maybe one is you can just repair a split like this with CA glue. Not very hard to do, fairly strong. And the other would be there are commercially available key buttons that you could use. And there are two reasons. And so I'm not going to dismiss either of those options. I think there are cases where they are right. But there are times where you can improve the strength of the key and decrease the likelihood of a second split forming. And then also you might just want a key button that looks a lot like the originals, and the key buttons that are commercially available from the supply houses today don't look like the key buttons in most pianos. So if you replace key buttons using them, generally speaking, it'll be very obvious to anyone that comes after you. And so here is the jig that I developed. It can create anywhere from 1 to 5 key buttons at one time. And it works with a plunge router with a guide bushing. And let's see, looks like I don't have one of those slides that shows my video. I'm going to stop sharing for just 1 second. And now you can see me, right?
That's correct.
So this doesn't have the router in it. This is a router plunge base. But what's important here is this piece of metal that is it's something that you add to it. So the router normally looks like this. It has a blade or a bit that comes down and turns here, and so this is called a guide bushing. It's just a tube that is lined up with it's centered on where the router bit is, and so I can push this up against something and it will stop the router from traveling any further in that direction. Okay. And so now you can see the PowerPoint again, right? So we can take the router with the guide bushing and drop the guide bushing into this hole. And then the router bit sticks out even further and cuts these mortises. So the real bit, like what would be difficult about cutting that mortise on your own with normal woodworking tools is that it would be very difficult to do that accurately. If you're going to use a chisel, for example, to make that mortise, it would be very difficult to kind of get thousandths of an inch level precision on that. Okay, so you have a 1/8 inch router bit in the router. You have the 1/2 inch guide bushing in the router, and then you use this template to guide where the router goes in order to cut out the mortise. If you're going to make one of these, here are the dimensions that you need. And this is designed to make a mortise that works well for 145 thousandths inch key pins, and the 1.3 millimeter pre-glued bushing cloth from Jan or Rayburn. Piano Works sells this cloth as well. And if you're not familiar with that, it's heat activated, so the glue is already on the bushing cloth, and you use a hot, soldering iron with a caul, a 145 thousandths inch caul that's hot to activate the glue and put the bushing cloth in. And then thankfully that common key pin size is kind of right in the middle of what the range of balance rail key pins are. And at least in theory, I can't say that I have actually tried it out with all of these sizes, but potentially you can use the same size of mortise, and just by changing the thickness of the bushing cloth, you can make key buttons that would work for other size key pins as well. And
okay, I'm going to pause there and we'll visit the last topic that Ben covers. We'll go over just a couple of minutes so you guys can get a taste of that. And then I'll sign us off. But let's check out the final key repair of 4 key repair topics that Ben covers, replacing the key buttons without making them yourself.
I think we're good. Checking the time here. Okay, and so the last one here is replacing key buttons. And this is a method that I learned from Mike Morvan as well. There's a jig I'm going to use for locating the key button. And I actually reached out to him today, and he still makes and sells it. It's $59, and he gave me a phone number in case anyone was interested in buying one. And so this is a job that there are multiple ways that this can be done. I'm going to teach a hand tools method. I think it's the best method when you are doing 1, 2, or 3. And if you're doing more than that, it's the method that's pretty easily adapted to power tools. But you wouldn't, for example, if you were doing all 88, you wouldn't take the old key button off using a chisel. You would use a router to do it. Okay, so why do key buttons break? We've been over that already with the previous repair. Wood strength is not the same in all dimensions, and so we have this this problem of short grain, where the grain is not lined up with the key, and thus it's relying on cross grain strength, with which it just doesn't have. And so the more dog-leg the keys are, really, the more exasperated that problem is. Solution is to make the grain run along the key and minimize the mortise size. And something that might be a bit controversial is that the mortise does not have to be perfectly square to the front of the key. And if you look at old Steinway pianos, they are not. And the way that I was taught by Mike was that if you are working on one of those pianos, you can duplicate it the way they did it. You don't need to correct it, so to speak, so that the mortise is perpendicular to the front of the keyboard. And by having the mortise a little bit angled, you're actually increasing the amount of wood you have on either side of it, which can help with the strength. And so I've done that, and I would say, as a pianist, I can't discern that those mortises are not perfectly perpendicular to the front of the keyboard. So just throw that out there as something to not be hard and fast, dead set against. So
Okay, guys, a lot of great info from Ben and Ken. And I just realized it rhymes, so that's wonderful, Ben and Ken today. Thank you guys for joining us. Unfortunately, we're at about the hour that we typically have. I wanted to go a little bit over just to make sure we got exposure to a little bit of everything that Ben covered. What a thorough guy. What a lot of great information. I really appreciate it. Both of these guys are wonderful. So I encourage you guys, I put some links in the chat. If you haven't seen, either of these full lectures, if you didn't come this week to Ben's, didn't check out Ken's, you can either sign up for the one-off lectures, or you can subscribe to Piano Tech masterclasses. Just go to the website, pianotechniciansmasterclass.com, subscribe. I recommend the intermediate $79 a month level. You get access to both of these whenever you like, or you can find the one-off lectures and to subscribe to them independently and have those for all time. Thank you very much, everyone. I'm going to sign us off. I really appreciate you guys coming and joining us each week. It's a privilege to have this time with you each week. So we have reached the end of another musical journey here at Piano Tech Radio Hour. Thanks again for Ken Walkup and Ben Rocke for joining us today. As always, we're brought to you by Piano Technicians Masterclasses. You signed up this session individually, make your life more convenient. Subscribe to PTRH, $16 a month to get the recording of today's session in our member area. Automatic registration for each week's news session. You could sign up at bit.ly/join PTRH. That's bit.ly/join PTRH. And then, of course, make sure you check out the audio-only podcast, pianotechradio.com, the blog at Substack. Just search for Piano Technicians Masterclasses. And check us out on all the socials, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, all that good stuff. Thanks so much again for joining us today, and hope to see you again next week or anytime. Reach out, give me an email. Love to chat. Okay.